So, after the Battle of Midway and the subsequent invasion of Guadalcanal, 1942, the war started to swing in the favor of the United States in the South Pacific. The only problem with the war was they did not have a fighter dominant enough to take on the Mitsubishi Zero. I cannot gear up there. And just a common dogfight. The Zero was way too maneuverable. The Wildcat had some strength, and the Wildcat was the Solomon at Guadalcanal, but the Zero still was kind of the master. Well, things started to change in 1943. 1943, newer equipment came in. The P38 was there, but they wanted something that could go up against the Japanese and fight them in a kind of a domineering way. Well, it doesn't mean they're going to get P51 Mustangs because they weren't available yet for this. But the Republic P47 was. And available and ready to go and fight. This kind of changed the war quite a bit because now you had a fighter plane that was far faster than the Zero and very strong, very potent in terms of fighting abilities. The Thunderbolt, I got everything set here. There we go. Was a lot larger than the Zero. If you put them in comparison to comparison, it was a bigger, heavier, faster plane. But the Thunderbolt was blessed with things that the Zero did not have. It had a high altitude advantage. It had a turbocharger built in along with the supercharger, which helped it to breathe at high altitude. It could use energy fighting, where it could be up high, dive really, really fast, and get up really, really fast because of the tremendous weight and size of the P-47. They initially had problems with fuel tanks on here. When they went into Australia, where they were based out of as far as aircraft, before they went to islands where they were in theater, they were trying to figure out a way to give this plane a better cruise ability. What they did was, Australia had these tanks called the Brisbane tanks. They're 200-gallon tanks. You could put one under each wing. And if you fit those tanks to here, the P-47 can fly all the way to New Guinea and back utilizing those tanks. And eventually Ford of Australia produced them because of the Thunderbolts that were shipped to the South Pacific had no drop tanks. Going to the little specs of the P-47, they had a 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800-59 18-cylinder air-cooled radio with 2,000 horsepower with a turbo supercharger, and you add water injections, 2,300 horsepower. The top speed of this plane listed as 426 to 444. I'm going to go with a higher one because some of these did have the injection system, which allowed them to go a lot faster. Range is 1,030 miles without tanks. With the Brisbane tanks, 1,800 miles, which is almost 2,000 miles. The ceiling of this plane was 42,000 feet. The speed that we're looking at here, the 444 miles per hour, could be attained at 23,200 feet. And it was equipped with 8 50 caliber machine guns in the wings with an arc of fire that would literally rip apart any plane that it came in contact with. Oh, what else can I say about this baby? They were deployed, like I said, they fitted them in Australia with the Brisbane tanks, and they were able to go out on patrol and go and escort bombers to New Guinea. So they were able to go and take care of the Japanese there. And as bases moved outward after the Solomon Islands started to be subdued, it wound up on island bases. Now, its main opponent initially was a Mitsubishi A5M2, 331 miles an hour, way more than 100 miles per hour slower, equipped with the two 7.7 millimeter machine guns and a two 20 millimeter cannon, the little spots in the wings there you see. And this plane did not have hydraulically actuated parts and things, controls. So you had to really push this plane, and it was not going to go and outclimb or outdive the P-47. I mean, it would literally fall apart. Because in my last video, the max not to exceed speed on this plane was 370, and in a dive, goes beyond that. Lord knows what's going to happen to this plane because it was super lightweight. Whereas this baby here, depending on how hard it dived, could go almost supersonic because of the weight. So in an energy battle, the P-47 is up high, sighted the zeros without proper armor and proper protection for the fuel, self-sealing fuel tanks. Those zeros were basically prey for the P-47s that were out doing their thing. They didn't really stand a chance. And I mean, that was just because of what you had. The P-47 was a more newer design than the Zero, but I mean, it was designed to do things that needed to be done and do it brutally. The cockpit on the P-47 had a heater in it. I mean, it was much more comfortable. The controls were easier to operate and more forgiving than on the Zero. And you had a plane that vastly outflew and outclassed the Zero in terms of performance and what the plane could do. Not to be outdone, the Japanese started to add newer planes. But remember, the Zero was still their most produced plane. So around this time, 1943, you started to see some other stuff coming into play. And that would be this. It would be the Japanese Army's Kawasaki Ki61 Tony. Why do they call it Tony? Because, I don't know. Because it kind of looked like the Italian fighter planes, the Machis and the Fiats, and they all use an inverted Daimler-Benz V12, as did this, to put it into combat. Now, how does this differ from the Zero? Well, I will explain. Let me get the P-47 back down. I have to do a more efficient way of doing that. This plane was powered by the Kawasaki HA40 inverted cooled V12 engine of 1,159 horsepower, basically a Japanese-made Daimler-Benz DB601. It had a range of 360 miles. It could go further with drop tanks. It had a ceiling of 38,100 feet. It had two 20 millimeter cannon in the wings and two heavy machine guns in the nose, synchronized to fire through the propeller hub. The machine guns had 650 rounds per gun, and the cannon in the wings, 250 rounds per gun. They could throw two 500-pound bombs. What made this plane different, top speed of 360 to 370 something, depending if they tweaked it and stuff, and the kind of fuel. And this plane had armor to protect the pilot and self-sealing fuel tanks. And it could do energy fighting. So what does that mean for the P-47 pilots flying against it? Well, it means that if the pilot in this plane was a good pilot, decent pilot, and knew what he was doing, he could wreak havoc on the P-47s. It couldn't dive as fast as the P-47, but the P-47 kind of did not recover out of its dive and go immediately into a climb and just kind of stay there. This baby could dive on it and damage a P-47 because it had a heavier armament. And if it were able to get away, it had armor plating and self-sealing fuel tanks, so it made it a different kind of an opponent for the P-47 pilot. So basically, this speed would go here. The diving in the energy boom and zoom tactic would go here, but this thing could do the same thing. Like I said, if you have a Japanese pilot that had skill and knew this plane, he definitely could go up and select when he's going to maybe draw this plane into a slower turning dogfight where this plane would, it could decimate it depending on how the pilot's skill was. You'd see a lot of these planes because the Japanese Army served on the islands at land bases. The Zero is primarily a Navy fighter. They were land based, but this was specifically land based, and it was a good fighter plane. It wouldn't blow up if you shot at it. It had self-sealing tanks. It had armor plating on it, so it was a different animal from the Zero. Um, the P-47 using energy tactics and diving passes. I mean, if the pilot was quick enough and stuff, it could actually take this. But if the pilot, like I said, were of equal or better skill, and this pilot were able to somehow get the P-47 to a slow kind of a turn thing, this plane could come up on top. Um, it had a better chance than the Zero. So at this point here, this would be 1943 going into 1944-ish. The Zero would be upgraded. We got a stronger engine, some body armor, I think maybe self-sealing tanks, but only a top speed of 351 miles an hour, which made it lose some of its famous maneuverability, which saved the pilot, but kind of made it just kind of like a mosquito fly on you swat it. This was a great plane from 1940 through 1942, early 43, but then it became outclassed really quick. And even in the realm of the Japanese, planes like this outclassed it. Different designs, different philosophies, and being that the Navy was more in a defensive mode, it weren't offensive because the Battle of Midway sunk four Japanese carriers: the Kaga, the Hiru, the Soru, and I think the Zukaku. And by sinking those four carriers, you took the offensive punch out of the Japanese Navy. And the thing that was even worse were you lost qualified and skilled pilots. So basically, pilots that were world class in this plane and the other planes were lost over at Midway or in the Solomons when we invaded Guadalcanal. It came to a new generation of pilots, a lot of Army pilots flying planes like these, hopefully going up. And they did okay. They were start to get material shortages, which kind of made it difficult for them to pursue the war the way they wanted to, and would make the quality drop on a lot of these. But I mean, they still had enough planes to go up, counter, and fight the Americans and the British, the Australians, and whoever else were in there messing with them in their little lake portion of the Pacific in the Far East. But this is a great plane, this one here, the Tony. And the Japanese use it to good effect. Like I said, great as a P-47. And another thing it didn't have going for it, it was not produced the way American planes were. They mass produced the heck out of the P-47. So these basically outnumbered in terms of that. And the only way to be an equalizer were for the Japanese to do a number on the American planes and down them. And it wasn't going to happen because the replacement rate on a Japanese plane was not the same as on an American plane were. They could be replaced easily and sent back in the flow to go and fight. Now, you notice they didn't have the P-51 Mustang here. Why is that? Because they needed them in Europe for fighting and escorting bombers. So they sent the P-47, and they used the P-47 in Europe too, but because of the island bases, the P-47 could use bases to refuel. It didn't have to rely totally on fuel tanks. So it still did, but I mean, they could get away with a lot that they couldn't in Europe. It was a kind of different kind of a war. And the war was mostly lower altitude in the Pacific also. So the P-47 had the ability to climb up high, and by doing that, it could go and come down hard on planes like these and destroy them. The only advantage these planes had was a slow turning dogfight, which didn't occur all the time. So, conclusion, the P-47 was faster, 444 miles per hour, versus the Tony, the Ki61 at 360 to 370, and the A6M2 at 331 miles an hour to the improved version that was 351 miles per hour. Throw into that the attrition rate and also the ability to replace what was lost in the P47 definitely was a juggernaut. It was able to dominate the Japanese. And if you use the P47 strength, its speed, its power, its ability to go in fast and get out fast, chances are you're going to win the battle. And as long as the pilots applied strict rules, which most of the pilots that flew these did, unlike the pilots at the beginning of the Pacific War, so they were in the driver's seat. Um, and then basically that's it here. You lose pilots, which the Japanese did. We gain pilots. The pilot training for the Japanese pilots, the quality slip. Ours, no, it actually got better. And the more you fought in combat, the more you were able to get engaged with the enemy, the better you became and more skilled. And basically that's how this all ended. It started with this after Pearl Harbor, went all the way across the Pacific into the Southwest Pacific. It was stopped at the Battle of Midway, June 4th, 1942, June 2nd to 4th, 1942. And then it started to turn away at Guadalcanal in August of 42 when the Marines invaded and went to the other Solomon Islands. And then the army was in New Guinea, which is south of the Solomons. And eventually, when that was overcome, you had a string of bases, island hopping, they called in the Pacific, where these planes had permanent bases. And as long as we had bases like kind of in a line, kind of like gas stations on a long road trip, you could like do the minimal amount as far as additional tanks and stuff and still be safe going to a place, getting fuel, and continuing on your patrol or whatever else it is that you were doing. So that's how everything kind of went out. But like now, if you look, there's not a lot of these planes that are flyable. There's a few Zeros flyable. There's some P47s. In fact, I've seen one of these at an air show. It's kind of unique, kind of anticlimactic when you've seen fancy jet fighter planes and racing planes, and here's this thing kind of buzzing along. And they even had it shooting its 7mm machine guns at blanks. And it sounded like a 22 pistol going off. So it was kind of weird. But this was state of the art in 1940. But because technology changed and the necessities of battle and the economics of battle changes became obsolete pretty quick. So then became a historical plane. This plane would go on, and eventually the Japanese would fit a radial engine because they liked radial engines a lot. There's a bit of complexity with producing the DB601, but they did produce them, and the versions that have this engine in here are actually pretty cool. It's very sleek, very nice, actually very up to date fighter plane. Because like I said, this thing here had armor plating and self sealing tanks, so a little bit better chance of survival in broader combat. So at the end of that, all that was left would be the monstrous P47. But if you look now, there's not too many of these around. They kind of scrapped a lot of them at the war, which is stupid because it's an air-cooled engine. It could do a lot of ground attack, take a lot of punishment, survive. But they chose the P-51 Mustang to be doing that after the war. So don't ask me. I would have used this plane. The plane is far more usable for what they were doing, and now they neglected not to do that. So anyway, I hope you like this. It's a little bit different than I thought it would be, but not bad. Give you a little bit more insight. And I'll think of what to do for the next one. I might do one with a P-38, but like I said, it's an extremely large plane, and it'd be kind of funky to do it here so you could see it, but I'll figure something out. But I will have something coming out next week. I don't know what. For everybody else, enjoy yourselves. Have a nice weekend. And those of you that are fathers, happy Father's Day. And those of you that still have fathers, remember to be nice, say hi, and take them out for something to eat. It doesn't have to be expensive. It could be cheap. But anyway, enjoy the weekend. Have fun. And I will see you next week.